In 1986, a little title would be released on the PC-88 known as Mugen Senshi Valis.
It's a pretty obscure franchise by today's standards, but it's still beloved by its community nonetheless.
With the recent re-release of Super Valis 4 on the Nintendo Switch's online services, it has re-sparked hope among the fans that a new entry in the long dormant and beloved series would finally come out and make up for almost a 15-year hiatus.
You know, minus the porn.
I guess we're just jumping right into this one, aren't we? Well, in late 2006, for the 20th anniversary of the series,
Happy birthday?
Telenet, the game's publisher, would decide to change the course of the franchise forever when they decided to make the next game in the beloved franchise into a hentai PC game.
The craziest part is that it's technically canon.
After its hentai debut, Valis would never have another game in its franchise.
Or will it?
So how did the Valis series fall into this debacle, and is there any hope the franchise can ever return to its former glory?
Today we're going to look at how Valis turned into porn.
For those that have never heard of it, Valis was a semi-popular video game franchise in the late 80s to early 90s, spawning numerous sequels, spin-offs, and plenty of merchandise.
It came out right around the time that anime was starting to get a foothold here in the West, so it has that distinct, 80s anime vibe in all of its related media.
In a lot of ways, the series was influential in some very unexpected ways. One of its major claims to fame was that it was an early pioneer of thematic cutscenes in video games, with the game actually coming out about 2 years prior to Ninja Gaiden, which is considered another pioneer in that regard.
The scenes are very basic in comparison to anything that happens nowadays, but I think that it's still interesting to look at nonetheless.
Another influence of the game comes from its overall look and aesthetic, because if you were to play the games now, you'd notice a lot of similarities to... And yeah, if you were a kid in the 90s, you can't say you didn't know about Sailor Moon and its eventual influence on the West today.
Now, I couldn't find any direct quotes that stated Valis served as any sort of inspiration to the series. However, the whole superhero girl in a school outfit was beginning to become a cliche around the late 80s in Japan.
However, Sailor Moon and Valis would share similar themes, motifs, and even the whole idea of transforming into superhero-type characters. Plus, the design of the Sailor Scouts and Valis are quite strikingly similar.
Hey, that's speculation for another time, though.
It should also be noted that Valis itself was also inspired by an OVA in 1985 entitled Lita, The Fantastic Adventures of Yoko.
Again, it's not 100% confirmed, however, we could literally sit here all day discussing the intricacies of the female Japanese schoolgirl trope. Actually, just gonna save that one for later.
Because of how obscure the franchise is nowadays, you wouldn't be wrong in not understanding how big a deal it was when the franchise became a porn series, and why it's an even bigger deal Valis 4 made it onto the Switch at all.
Because if you follow Nintendo even a little bit, you'll know it's one of the most hardcore companies when it comes to being protected, whether that it's its image or in regards to censorship.
The wholesome family company of Nintendo will basically murk anyone or anything if even the slightest idea of piracy, nudity, or anything that could harm its image pops up.
They're essentially the Disney of video games.
I was inspired to look this up a few weeks ago after watching one of my favorite dead channels, the Ultra Healthy Video Game Nerd. He did a really great episode on Valis a few years ago, and my little brother after he told me about the subject.
If I can come clean, and from a reference standpoint, I didn't actually grow up with the Valis series. Between you and me though, that won't stop you from facepalming at least a couple times in this video. And by the way, for my brother, in a couple of years when you do find out that I actually have a YouTube channel, hey, yeah, a couple years ago you totally inspired me to make this video, so sorry I didn't tell you I had a YouTube channel till now.
So let's take a trip back to 2006. One of your favorite obscure franchises is not only getting a new game, but it's going to be a 20th anniversary special called Valis X.
Sounds like Mega Man X. Why wouldn't this be amazing?
And then imagine the horror you feel after witnessing one of your childhood heroes, your innocence, getting violated by a tentacle monster.
Now let's be real for a second, fan art and hentai has existed long before this came out. Hell, we've even looked at stuff on this channel that predates this.
However, that still doesn't mean it probably didn't shock a lot of people who weren't into the franchise just to see the star heroine Yuko's boobs. Typing in Valis X online will bring up a plethora of how to ruin a franchise articles or the death of Valis, etc. from that era. To say this killed the franchise would be a bit of an understatement.
If you consider the fact that a new game hasn't been made in like 15 years, that should pretty much tell you all you need to know.
So how did Valis X come to be, and what the hell is it?
Here's a fun fact. In all the weird topics that we've actually looked up, I've never had to actually watch or look at any tentacle porn. Unless you count Cthulhu, which I kind of don't, but I mean, that's for obvious reasons. Well, with this video, that officially changed.
So in one of the more bizarre corporate acquisitions I've ever seen in my life, in 2004, Tellenet's Valis creators and publisher decided to put in a bid to purchase an adults-only Japanese game portal website, simply known as bb5.jp. To the best of my knowledge, as the original site's incarnation is now dead but can still be reached on the Wayback Machine, bb5.jp was originally an independent site used for various publishers to sell their erotic games.
Think like Steam, or if you want to go even further back than that, think like GameSpy Arcade, albeit in a much more basic form.
Navigating the site nowadays, it is a bit harder to do as the Wayback Machine doesn't exactly utilize a translator. However, you can get the feel for the layout and how they went about presenting the site. For the most part, it was all pretty standard. You would have your new releases out front and then various categories that you could search up.
So 50% of the time when I do these videos, I'm not intentionally going out of my way to uncover a lot of these dead websites.
However, given the age of the internet, there is a lot of old stuff that is interesting to look back on.
However, I guess we could throw this one in the pile of happy accidents.
Nowadays, it's an eroji site entitled bb5.eroji. I'm almost positive at this point there is no involvement from Telenet, though.
Mostly because they shut their doors down in October of 2007, so I'm assuming their porn gamble didn't exactly pay off.
Speaking of their porn gamble, immediately after purchasing the website, Telenet went right to work in producing content for the site. Instead of utilizing the original group who made Valis, known as Wolf Team, they decided to hire visual novel creator and publishers Eons. Seeing as how the 20th anniversary of Valis was also coming up, they decided not only would this be a great idea to promote traffic to their erotica website, but could also celebrate and give back to the loving and adoring fans of Valis by creating an erotica visual novel based on the characters.
Spoiler, they hated it.
Plot-wise, the story is a retelling of the original franchise, albeit retconned and changed to fit the visual novel style. This includes changing the plot so certain characters who wouldn't appear until later on in the series would appear in the initial chapters.
Now, keep in mind, I'm only going to be showing you the tame and censored stuff when it comes to Valis X. Or Valis Cross if you want to be a stickler about it and split hairs, but in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and read to you the interpretation from Hardcore Gaming 101 as they discuss their thoughts and emotions while playing Valis X. Enjoy.
Valis X is filth of the worst order, full of bizarre fetish porn and misogynist bullshit. The series has never been overly prudish, but this fate is a bit much to stomach. Cham and Volna,
those were the two characters that I had kind of mentioned previously,
appear from the very beginning to have more female characters at hand to objectify and exploit. Being a visual novel, Valis X actually has a lot more room for dialogue and character building than the action games. It's just kind of hard to get engaged in any of it when the next disturbing rape fantasy is always waiting just around the corner.
Now, I didn't read you guys the whole article, but I do have it linked below if you want to check it out.
I do want to point out, I think it's kind of funny that they tried to maintain the whole critic persona by commenting on the story and how the story could be much better. And I just think it's kind of funny that anytime you look up a lot of pornographic material, reviewers will always comment about, oh, how it could have been so much better if they would have just focused on this, this, or that, pretending like they're reviewing Citizen Kane, when in reality, it's usually filled with tentacle monsters. And speaking of, there are plenty of those in this game.
I mean, it had to show up eventually, right?
So why was this insulting to the fans? Well, consider this. The equivalent would be if for the 20th anniversary of the original Star Wars,
you know, aside from the prequels,
George Lucas decided that the best way to give back to the fans of the series who'd loved it since childhood, and after he randomly purchased X-Hamster, decided the best course of action would be to turn the original trilogy into a hardcore pornography to feature on his newly acquired site.
And call it Episode 7 and have it semi-canon to the original trilogy.
And I'm sure the Sarlacc pit would definitely be involved.
You know, because the tentacles.
At the very least, this boneheaded move of making a Valis porno
for the fans
proved that no, fans don't just love a franchise for the sake of titillation. This event also became a glaring example of property owners clearly not understanding why people love their franchise.
My interpretation's pretty simple. They were just trying to make money, and they thought the best way to do it would be to prey on the Valis fans.
In a way, it's a super disrespectful way to treat your fans, pretending to care by making it a 20th anniversary special only to essentially release a porn parody of the franchise to boost your erotica site.
And hey, if you're a Valis fan and you enjoyed this, I'm not judging you. All I'm saying is that if we take a look at some of these forums, you may find yourself in the minority. Funny enough, if you look at some of these comments, a lot of the users were kind of in denial and thought that these might have been doujinshis. It's not. And that made me think of Gynax and Evangelion again.
However, like Gynax, this too was an officially sanctioned work, and although there are no sales figures on whether the hentai excursions of Gynax were very profitable, they were sure to make those excursions less and less overt after their sanctioned Evangelion hentais.
See, where I think Telenet fucked up is that not only did they make this a sanctioned pornographic game, but they also labeled this as a 20th anniversary special game.
If this had just been released without the 20th anniversary moniker, I don't think it would have gotten nearly the amount of heat that it did.
On the Valis X wiki, it states that reviewers tended to dismiss this one as not being canon with the series. However, that's only the reviewers' opinions.
But we both know the truth.
Oh, no tears, please. It's a waste of good suffering.
And considering only a year later Telenet would shut down for good, I don't think it panned out for them. Funny enough, despite all the hate given to this entry in the series, the redesign of the protagonist Yuko from this entry would be used on Valis-related media in the future.
So consolation prize, I guess?
Is all hope lost for Valis? Is the stain of an in poor taste hentai enough to keep this fallen franchise buried in the gutter of gaming history? Well, maybe not. Like I mentioned before, Valis 4 being released on the Switch is a big deal, which means that whoever owns the rights for this now more than likely than not have eliminated the hentai game from its canon.
Or appeased the Nintendo gods somehow.
More importantly though, a team named Idea in late 2020 has launched a website for the 35th anniversary of Valis. On it, a completely redesigned image of Yuko appeared with the words "coming soon" at the top. They also have launched a Twitter that you can follow right now that is simply Valis Game, and I'll have that linked below. As of right now, it's unclear if this is a re-release of the original game, remake, reboot, or sequel entirely. If I was to speculate, given her current costume, I'd say this is a reboot of some sort to the series.
Honestly, given how long it's been since a proper sequel's been made, a reboot might be the best thing for the franchise right now, if anything to help get new fans into the story at the beginning.
Will it be any good? Well, only time will tell. However, this game has a lot going for it. With indie developers nowadays able to create memorable titles with only a handful of people, there isn't a reason this Valis game can't work. It has that classic hero rises from the ashes tale, with the last game being a blight on the franchise for 15 years, only to return to its former glory and create a game that lives up but could potentially surpass all expectations.
I want to reiterate, I didn't grow up with Valis, so I'm not really nostalgically driven either way. However, I do have my fingers crossed for the fans of the franchise. Anyway, make sure to keep things light and rebellious, and I'll see you guys next time.